Before Christopher Columbus ever set sail, before the Portuguese mapped the African coast, there was a kingdom so overflowing with gold it crashed the economies of 3 continents. Its emperor walked through cities and gave gold away like dust. His name was Mansa Musa, and Europe never recovered. Stay until the end, because the story of Mansa Musa is not just about gold. It is about power, faith, and a single journey that rewrote every map in the known world. In the early 14th century, the world was struggling. Europe was a patchwork of feudal kingdoms, battered by the Black Death, starved of silver, and desperate for new trade routes. The Arab world, powerful and learned, controlled the flow of goods between East and West. And China, though wealthy, was locked behind vast distances that few merchants could cross. But south of the Sahara Desert, in a region most Europeans had never seen and could barely imagine, a civilization had been quietly building itself into something extraordinary. It was not born overnight. It had taken centuries of war, diplomacy, and trade to construct. And by the time the 14th century arrived, it had become the largest empire on Earth. This was the Mali Empire. At its height, the Mali Empire stretched across nearly 2 million square kilometers of West Africa. It encompassed what is today Senegal, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Guinea, the Ivory Coast, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Nigeria, Chad, and Mauritania. More than 50 million people lived within its borders. Its cities were centers of scholarship, architecture, and commerce. Its markets traded in salt, copper, ivory, cola nuts, and above all, gold. The empire had not always been this powerful. Its origins lay in the aftermath of collapse. In the 11th century, the Ghana Empire, which had dominated West African trade for centuries, fell to the Almoravid Berber dynasty from the north. What remained of Ghana's fragmented kingdoms was slowly absorbed and reorganized. Then, in the early 13th century, a warrior king named Sundiata Keita changed everything. Sundiata was the founder of the Mali Empire. According to the oral traditions preserved by the griots, the historian storytellers of West Africa, Sundiata was born with a physical disability that prevented him from walking in his early years. He was mocked, exiled, and overlooked, but he returned. At the Battle of Kirina in 1235, Sundiata's forces defeated the Soso king Sumanguru Kante, a warrior sorcerer who had terrorized the region. That victory gave Sundiata control over the gold-producing heartlands of West Africa, and it established the dynastic framework from which all subsequent Malian emperors, including Mansa Musa, would rule. What made the Mali Empire genuinely invincible in economic terms was geography. It sat directly over 2 of the richest gold-producing regions in the known world, the Bambouk goldfields in the west along the Senegal River and the Bure goldfields further east. Estimates apt that at its peak, the Mali Empire was producing roughly half of the world's gold supply. Not a quarter, not a third, half. The methods of gold extraction were both highly organized and tightly controlled. The Malian state did not own the mines outright. Instead, a system known to Arab scholars as the silent trade governed the exchange. Malian merchants would travel to the gold-producing villages on the empire's southern frontier, leave goods, and retreat. The local miners, whose exact location and methods were deliberately kept secret, would leave an amount of gold in exchange. No direct contact, no negotiation, no disclosure of sources. This arrangement, strange as it sounds to modern ears, was effective precisely because it protected both parties. The miners kept their location secret, the merchants kept reliable access to gold, and the Malian state taxed the exchange at every point where goods and gold crossed its territory. Gold was power. In medieval economics, gold determined everything. The strength of currencies, the capacity of armies, the scope of diplomatic leverage. The kingdoms of North Africa, the merchants of the Middle East, and the trading republics of Europe all ran on gold, and most of that gold came from Mali. But Mali did not only control gold, it also controlled salt. In the Saharan region of Tagaza, there were salt mines that produced slabs of pure rock salt so valuable they were literally used as currency. Salt was essential for preserving food, for tanning leather, for survival in the desert. The Malian Empire sat between the gold fields of the south and the salt mines of the north, taxing every caravan that passed through its territory. Merchants from Morocco, Egypt, and Timbuktu crossed the Sahara to bring salt southward in exchange for gold. The empire took its cut on both ends of the transaction, every year for generations. This was not luck, it was system, and it was guarded by one of the most formidable militaries in the medieval world. The Mali army at its height consisted of more than 100,000 soldiers, infantry, cavalry, and a river fleet that patrolled the Niger River. Cities that tried to break free from Malian control were reconquered. Trade routes that were threatened were defended. The empire did not achieve its wealth by accident. It held it by force, by law, and by relentless commercial intelligence. Into this empire, already centuries deep in gold, was born a man named Musa Keita. He would become the 9th Mansa, or Emperor of Mali. History would remember him as Mansa Musa. The exact year of his birth is uncertain. What is known is that he came to power around 1312, following the disappearance of his predecessor, Abu Bakr II, who had reportedly launched a massive naval expedition into the Atlantic and never returned. Mansa Musa had not originally expected to rule. He served as deputy to Abu Bakr II, a position that obligated him to govern in the absence of the emperor and inherit the throne if the emperor did not return. When the fleet vanished into the Western Sea, the throne fell to Musa. He inherited an already enormous empire and then expanded it further. During his reign, he conquered the city of Timbuktu and the Songhai trading hub of Gao, adding immense strategic value to his territories. He reorganized the empire's provincial administration, placing loyal generals and governors in command of key regions. He deepened the Islamic character of the court, surrounding himself with judges, teachers, and religious scholars. By the time he prepared for his pilgrimage to Mecca, he had transformed Mali from a powerful trading empire into a fully articulated Islamic state, one whose reputation had begun to reach, faintly, the merchants and diplomats of the Arab world. But it was not military conquest that made Mansa Musa the most famous man in the medieval world. It was a single journey. In 1324, Mansa Musa announced that he would perform the Hajj, the sacred pilgrimage to Mecca required of all devout Muslims who are able. The Hajj was not unusual for Muslim rulers. What was unusual, what was unprecedented in the history of human civilization, was the scale of what Mansa Musa brought with him. According to the accounts of Arab scholars, including Ibn Khaldun and al-Umari, who gathered testimony from eyewitnesses and court officials, Mansa Musa's caravan consisted of approximately 60,000 people. This included 12,000 personal servants, each of whom carried 4 pounds of gold bars. It included 500 slaves who marched ahead of the emperor, each carrying a golden staff weighing around 6 pounds. It included a personal retinue of nobles, court officials, doctors, and scholars. And it included a baggage train of 80 to 100 camels, each carrying 300 pounds of gold dust. The total value of gold that left Mali in 1324 is estimated by modern economists at somewhere between $400 million and $1 billion in today's terms. Some estimates go higher. The caravan traveled north through the Sahara, across what is now Algeria and Libya, and arrived in Cairo in July of 1324. The streets of Cairo had seen powerful rulers before. The Mamluk Sultanate that governed Egypt was itself one of the most sophisticated states of the medieval world. But nothing had prepared Cairo for Mansa Musa. He arrived with his thousands of attendants, his camels, his golden staffs, his lavish tents. He gave gifts, he gave alms, he distributed gold to the poor in the streets of Cairo. He spent gold in the markets. He gave gold to officials, to merchants, to mosques. He reportedly spent gold so freely and in such quantity that the markets could not absorb it. And here is where history turned. The sudden flood of gold into the Egyptian economy did not make Egypt richer. It destroyed the price of gold entirely. When any commodity becomes available in overwhelming abundance, its value collapses. Gold was no different. The price of gold in Cairo and then across the entire Middle East fell sharply and did not recover for more than a decade. Some accounts suggest the economic damage lasted 12 years. Merchants who had made fortunes in the gold trade found their wealth suddenly devalued. The carefully balanced economics of the Trans-Sahara trade route were thrown into disorder. Mansa Musa, realizing what he had done, reportedly attempted to correct the damage on his return journey by borrowing gold back from Egyptian merchants at high interest rates, deliberately taking gold out of circulation to restore its value. It was, arguably, the first recorded deliberate act of monetary policy in African history.
From Cairo, the caravan continued to Mecca. The Hajj itself went undocumented in fine detail, but its political significance was enormous. Mansa Musa met scholars, diplomats, and religious leaders from across the Islamic world. He returned with one of the most consequential acquisitions of his reign, the poet and architect Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, a native of Granada in what is now southern Spain. Al-Sahili accompanied Mansa Musa back to Mali and transformed the physical landscape of the empire. He introduced to West Africa the fired brick construction techniques of North Africa and the Arab world. Under his direction, the Djinguereber Mosque was built in Timbuktu in 1327. It stands to this day one of the oldest and most important mosques in sub-Saharan Africa, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Mansa Musa also built a palace in Timbuktu and launched a construction program across his empire that gave physical permanence to Malian wealth and culture. Timbuktu itself, which had been a significant trading city before Mansa Musa's reign, became under his rule one of the most remarkable cities on earth. At its peak, Timbuktu was home to a population of roughly 100,000 people. The Sankore Madrasa, which functioned as a university, enrolled up to 25,000 students. Scholars came from across the Muslim world to study theology, law, mathematics, astronomy, and literature. The city's libraries eventually housed an estimated 700,000 manuscripts, a collection comparable to, and in some estimates exceeding, the great libraries of medieval Europe. And in 1375, 50 years after Mansa Musa's pilgrimage, a Majorcan cartographer named Abraham Cresques produced what became known as the Catalan Atlas, one of the most sophisticated maps of the medieval world. At the center of West Africa, the atlas depicted a single figure, a robed king seated on a golden throne, wearing a golden crown, holding a golden scepter in one hand and a golden orb in the other. The inscription next to the figure read in Catalan, "So abundant is the gold which is found in his country, that he is the richest and most noble king in all the land." That figure was Mansa Musa. He had been dead for roughly 40 years, but his image was now on the maps that European sailors used to navigate the world. Europe's hunger began from that moment. The kings of Portugal, Castile, Aragon, and Genoa had been searching for new trade routes for decades, not out of mere curiosity, but out of necessity. The Ottoman Empire controlled the eastern land routes to Asia. The Arab merchants controlled the trans-Saharan gold trade. Gold was scarce in Europe, and the economies of the continent ran on it. When the Catalan Atlas showed a West African king literally holding the world's gold in his hand, the message to European rulers was unmistakable. Go south, go west, find the source. Prince Henry of Portugal, known to history as Henry the Navigator, launched a systematic program of Atlantic exploration in the early 15th century. Portuguese ships began probing the West African coastline, seeking a maritime route to the gold of the interior. By 1441, Portuguese sailors had reached the coast of what is now Mauritania. By 1482, they had built the first European trading fort in sub-Saharan Africa, at Elmina, in present-day Ghana, a region the Portuguese called Amina, meaning the mine, because of the gold they found there.
Christopher Columbus, who sailed westward in 1492, was not searching for the Americas. He was trying to find a new route to Asia and to the gold of West Africa by circumnavigation. Vasco da Gama's voyage around the Cape of Good Hope in 1498 was explicitly aimed at bypassing Arab merchants to reach the spice and gold trades directly. The age of exploration was not born from idle curiosity or even scientific ambition. It was born from economic desperation. And that desperation was, in no small part, ignited by a single image on a map. A West African emperor so rich that he had flooded the markets of Cairo with gold and changed the economy of the medieval world forever. But the story does not end in triumph. The European hunger that Mansa Musa's wealth had sparked ultimately contributed to the destruction of West African civilization. The Portuguese, Spanish, and later Dutch, British, and French did not simply trade for gold, they enslaved. When the transatlantic slave trade began in earnest in the 16th century, it systematically stripped West Africa of its population, its labor, and its political stability. The descendants of the civilization that had produced Mansa Musa were transported in chains across the Atlantic to build wealth for the same European powers that had spent a century chasing the gold on his map. The Mali Empire itself had already begun to decline by the mid-15th century. Internal power struggles weakened the central authority. Rival claimants to the throne fractured the court. Provincial governors who had once been loyal began asserting independence. The empire that had held together across vast distances through military strength and commercial control began to fray at its edges. In 1468, the Songhai king, Sunni Ali, captured Timbuktu. By 1591, a Moroccan army armed with firearms crossed the Sahara and destroyed the Songhai state in a series of decisive battles. The great trading cities were sacked. The scholars fled or were killed. Many of the manuscripts of Timbuktu were hidden in the sand or carried into the desert by families who preserved them for generations. Some are still being recovered and digitized today. Mansa Musa died around 1337, likely in his late 40s or early 50s. Historians debate the exact year. What is not debated is what he left behind. He had ruled an empire of 50 million people at a time when the population of England was around 5 million. He had performed a pilgrimage that reshaped the economics of the medieval world. He had built cities, mosques, and universities that transmitted knowledge across generations. He had placed West Africa at the center of the world's economic imagination. Modern economists who have attempted to calculate his net worth in today's terms arrive at figures ranging from $300 to $400 billion. By any measure, Mansa Musa was the wealthiest individual in recorded human history. He is largely absent from the history books taught in Western schools. The civilizations that came after him spent considerable energy ensuring that the origin of much of the world's wealth, including the wealth that funded the Renaissance, that built the cathedrals of Europe, that financed the voyages of discovery,
would not be traced back to a black African emperor who once walked through Cairo giving gold to strangers. But the evidence was always there. In the manuscripts of Timbuktu, in the account books of Cairo merchants, in the verses of Arab historians, in the inflation records of 14th century Egypt, and in the center of a medieval map where a king in a golden crown sits on a golden throne holding the world in his hand. The maps were always wrong about who held the power, and the gold, the real gold, was never European. If this story made you see history differently, share it, because the greatest empires are often the ones they never taught you about. Subscribe for more untold histories that didn't just shape the world, they built it.